A single dad hears a scream in the dark. Minutes later, he saves a woman who isn't just anyone. She's a billionaire, hiding a secret that could change both their lives forever. The night had that hollow, metallic silence that only industrial districts seem to carry, where every distant clang echoes a little too long and every shadow feels heavier than it should. My shift had run late again, and by the time I stepped out into the dimly lit street, the world already felt abandoned. The air was cold enough to bite, slipping through my jacket as I shoved my hands into my pockets and started the long walk toward the bus stop. My thoughts weren't on the darkness around me, they were on my son. I pictured him asleep on the couch, probably still clutching that worn-out toy truck he refused to let go of. I'd promised him I'd be home earlier tonight. I always promised. And I was always a little late. That quiet guilt sat heavier on me than the exhaustion in my bones. The street stretched ahead, lined with silent warehouses, massive rusted shells of industry that looked like they hadn't seen life in years. Flickering streetlights struggled to stay awake, casting uneven pools of light that left the spaces between them swallowed in darkness. My footsteps echoed softly against the pavement, steady and predictable, until they weren't the only sound anymore. At first, it was just a murmur, then sharper, urgent. A woman's voice. I slowed. There it was again, strained, frightened, unmistakably real. Every instinct told me to keep walking. This part of town didn't forgive curiosity. People minded their business here, and the ones who didn't, well, they usually regretted it. I could already feel my body trying to rationalize it away. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it wasn't my problem. Maybe someone else would step in. But then I heard it again, this time breaking, like something inside her was about to snap. That was enough. I turned the corner. 3 figures stood in the narrow alley, their shapes jagged against the dim glow of a single flickering light. They had her cornered, pressed up against a cold, graffiti-stained wall. Even from a distance, I could tell she didn't belong here. Her clothes were sharp, tailored, completely out of place in a place like this. One of them grabbed at her bag while another blocked her escape, their movements aggressive, impatient. Time didn't slow down like people say it does. It sped up. Before I could think, before I could plan, I was already moving. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice cutting through the alley. They turned. For a split second, everything froze. 3 pairs of eyes locked onto me, measuring, calculating. Then it all exploded. The first one rushed me, fast and reckless. I barely had time to react before his shoulder slammed into me, knocking the air from my chest. We staggered, crashing into the side of a dumpster, the impact rattling through my bones. Pain flared in my ribs, sharp and immediate, but adrenaline drowned it out before it could take hold. I swung back, clumsy, untrained but desperate. My fist connected with something solid, and he stumbled. Another one came at me from the side, grabbing my jacket, trying to drag me down. For a moment it felt like I was going to lose, that I'd made a mistake stepping into something bigger than me. But then I thought of my son, and something inside me refused to back down. I twisted free, shoving one of them hard enough to send him off balance. The woman darted away from the wall, creating just enough chaos to throw them off. One of the attackers cursed, clearly not expecting resistance, and that hesitation was all it took. The fight shifted, not clean, not controlled, but just enough to break whatever hold they thought they had. "Forget it," one of them snapped. They backed off, one by one, their confidence gone as quickly as it had come. Within seconds, they disappeared into the darkness they came from, their footsteps fading into the night. Silence rushed back in, heavy, ringing. I stood there, breathing hard, every muscle in my body trembling from the adrenaline crash. My ribs ached now, sharp and insistent, and I could already feel tomorrow's bruises forming. But I was still standing, and so was she. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The world seemed to hold its breath, as if unsure whether it really was over. Then she straightened slightly, brushing a strand of hair from her face, her composure returning faster than I expected. "Are you hurt?" I asked, my voice rough. She shook her head, though her breathing was still uneven. "No, thanks to you." There was something in her eyes, not just fear, but something sharper, controlled, observant. "Thank you," she said, again, quieter this time. I nodded, not sure what else to say. I wasn't a hero. I hadn't planned any of this. I just didn't walk away. Up close, I could see the details now. The precision in her clothing, the subtle elegance, the kind that didn't belong in back alleys and broken streets. Whoever she was, she didn't fit into this world. And yet, here she was. The mystery of her lingered in the silence between us. I had no idea who she was, but something told me this wasn't where the story ended. The silence after the chaos felt almost unnatural, like the world was trying to reset itself after something it hadn't expected. The alleys still carried the echoes of the struggle: scuffed pavement, a knocked-over trash bin, the faint metallic tang of adrenaline lingering in the air. I shifted slightly, wincing as the ache in my ribs sharpened now that the rush was fading. She noticed. Of course she did. There was something about her, something observant, controlled, that made it clear she missed very little. For a moment she steadied herself against the wall, her composure returning piece by piece, like someone rebuilding a mask they couldn't afford to let slip for long. Then she looked at me, really looked this time, her gaze sharp despite everything that had just happened. "You need medical attention," I said, breaking the silence, nodding toward the faint smear of blood at her side. It wasn't heavy, but it was enough to matter. "So do you," she replied calmly, glancing at my ribs before meeting my eyes again. Her voice didn't tremble. If anything, it carried a strange authority, as if she were more accustomed to giving instructions than receiving help. "There's a hospital 10 minutes from here," I added, already pulling my phone out of my pocket, ready to call for a ride or at least check directions. But before I could unlock the screen, she reached out, not urgently, but firmly, and stopped me. "No hospital," she said. The words weren't a suggestion, they were a decision. I frowned slightly, confused. "You're bleeding." "I'll be fine," she insisted, her tone softening just enough to acknowledge the concern without yielding to it. "There's somewhere else, somewhere safer." That word, safer, hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning I didn't yet understand. Every logical part of me told me this was where I should step back. I'd done my part, I'd helped. That should have been enough. But something in her expression, something guarded yet quietly desperate, kept me from walking away. "All right," I said, finally, slipping my phone back into my pocket. "Where to?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a steadying breath, then gestured toward the street beyond the alley. "We'll need a car." The ride was quiet, too quiet. The city passed by in blurred streaks of dim lights and empty roads, the driver occasionally glancing at us through the rearview mirror, probably sensing the tension but smart enough not to ask questions. She gave directions in short, precise phrases. "Left here, straight ahead, keep going," her voice steady, controlled, as if nothing about tonight had shaken her at all. But every now and then I caught the subtle shifts, the way her hand pressed slightly harder against her side, the way her eyes flickered toward the window like she was making sure we weren't being followed. Wherever we were going, it wasn't just about avoiding the hospital, it was about staying hidden. Eventually, the car slowed, then stopped. I looked out the window and frowned. We were back in an industrial zone, different from the one where we'd met, but not by much. Warehouses stretched out in every direction, their rusted exteriors blending into the darkness like they were trying to disappear entirely. There were no signs, no activity, nothing to suggest this place held anything of importance. "Here?" I asked, unable to keep the skepticism out of my voice. She nodded once, already opening the door. "This is where I need to be." I hesitated for just a second before following her out. The cold air hit again, sharper this time, carrying the faint scent of metal and dust. She moved with purpose despite her injury, leading me toward one of the largest warehouses, a massive structure of corrugated steel, its surface weathered and worn like it had been abandoned years ago. No lights, no guards, nothing. It didn't make sense. She stopped in front of a section of the wall that looked no different from the rest. For a moment I thought maybe she'd made a mistake, or worse, that I had. But then she raised her hand and pressed it flat against the steel. There was a faint click, almost inaudible. Then a soft glow spread beneath her palm, scanning, reading.
I stepped back instinctively, my confusion sharpening into something closer to disbelief. The wall was alive. A thin line of light traced itself along the edges of what I suddenly realized was a hidden door. It slid open with a smooth, silent precision that felt completely out of place in a building that looked like it should have collapsed years ago. And then I saw it. Inside wasn't decay. It was something else entirely. Light spilled outward, clean and bright, illuminating a space that looked like it belonged in a different world. Glass panels, digital displays, a vast open command center stretching farther than I could immediately process. It was like stepping through time or into a secret no one was supposed to find. I stood there frozen, trying to reconcile what I was seeing with what I had expected. "What is this?" I asked, my voice quieter now, edged with awe and confusion. She stepped inside first, then turned back to look at me, her expression unreadable, but no longer guarded in the same way. "It's where I go," she said softly, "when the world can't see me." I hesitated only for a moment before crossing the threshold, and the second I did, I knew one thing for certain. Saving her in the alley hadn't been the end of something. It had been the beginning.
Crossing the threshold felt like stepping into a reality that shouldn't exist, like the laws of the outside world had quietly been left behind the moment that hidden door sealed shut behind us. The air inside was different, clean, controlled, carrying the faint hum of advanced systems working in perfect synchronization. My boots echoed against a polished floor that reflected soft white lighting from above, and for a second, I just stood there, trying to process the impossible contrast. Outside, everything had been rust, decay, and silence. In here, it was precision, power, and intention. She moved ahead of me, her pace steady despite the injury she had tried so hard to ignore. If she was in pain, she hid it well, too well. She approached a sleek console and tapped a sequence of commands, and almost instantly the space came alive. Screens flickered on around us, dozens of them displaying streams of data, financial markets, global maps, security feeds. It wasn't just an office, it was a nerve center. Whoever she wasn't just important. She operated on a level far beyond anything I had imagined. I turned slowly, taking it all in, when something else caught my attention. Along the far wall, away from the glow of digital screens, was something entirely different. It didn't belong in a place like this. At first glance, it looked almost handmade. Sheets of paper pinned carefully across the surface, overlapping in places, each one filled with sketches, notes, and photographs. There were no glowing interfaces here, no sleek glass or polished metal, just ink, pencil, and memory. Drawn lines connected ideas across the wall like veins, forming something that looked less like a design and more like a story frozen in progress. I stepped closer without thinking, drawn to it in a way I couldn't explain. The handwriting varied, some sharp and precise, others softer, almost hesitant. Names of places, diagrams of buildings, lists of resources. But it wasn't just planning, it was personal, deeply personal. "What is this?" I asked quietly, not turning around. For a moment, there was no answer. Then I heard her footsteps behind me, slower now, more deliberate. "It's what's left," she said. I turned then. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the wall. The composure she had carried since the alley, the quiet control that seemed natural to her, it had shifted. Not completely broken, but cracked just enough to let something real show through. She walked past me and reached out, her fingers hovering just above one of the pinned photographs. It showed a man, smiling, relaxed, standing in front of what looked like a construction site. There was something warm about him, something grounded. "My husband," she said softly. The words settled heavily in the space between us. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. "He built all of this," she continued, her voice quieter now, like she was speaking more to the memory than to me. "Not the company people see, not the headlines. This,
Her hand gestured toward the wall. This was his real work. I looked again, this time seeing it differently. The sketches weren't random. They were plans, schools in underserved areas, mobile clinics, housing projects, education programs. Each sheet represented something unfinished, something paused in time. "What happened?" I asked gently. Her jaw tightened slightly, and for a moment I thought she might not answer. Then she exhaled slowly, like she was letting go of something she had been holding on to for too long. "I lost him. Too fast. No warning. One day he was here, and the next—" She stopped, her voice catching just enough to betray the weight behind it. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Silence filled the room again, but it felt different now. Not empty. Heavy. "I took over everything after that," she went on, her tone shifting back toward control, but not fully. "The company, the responsibilities, the expectations." A faint, almost bitter smile touched her lips. "They needed me to be strong, unshakable, a leader." "And you couldn't show this," I said, nodding toward the wall. Her eyes met me then, sharp but tired. "I can't afford to," she said simply. "To them, I'm the CEO who makes impossible decisions without hesitation. If they see doubt, if they see grief—" She shook her head slightly. "Everything changes." I understood more than I expected to. Not the scale of her world, not the pressure of running something that vast, but the idea of holding everything together because someone else depended on you. That part wasn't so different. "So you built this place," I said, glancing around, "to keep it hidden?" She nodded. "Out there, I lead an empire." Her gaze shifted back to the wall, softening again. "In here, I remember why it exists." I let that sit for a moment. "You're still building it," I said, quietly. She looked at me, surprised. I gestured toward the wall. "You didn't take it down. You didn't walk away from it. That means something." For the first time since I'd met her, something in her expression changed. Not just vulnerability, but something closer to recognition, like I had seen something she didn't expect anyone else to notice. "Maybe," she said, almost to herself. And in that moment, standing in a hidden warehouse filled with both power and pain, I realized something I hadn't when I first stepped inside. This wasn't just her secret. It was her unfinished world. The room felt quieter now, but not in the same hollow way as before. This silence carried weight, shared, understood, almost fragile. The glow from the surrounding screens had dimmed slightly, casting a softer light across the warehouse office, as if even the technology knew to step back and let something more human take center stage. I leaned against the edge of a nearby console, careful of my ribs, while she remained near the wall of unfinished dreams, her presence caught somewhere between the woman who ran a global empire and the one who stood here holding on to something deeply personal. For the first time since we met, neither of us seemed in a hurry to move, to speak, or to return to the roles the outside world demanded of us. "You don't seem surprised," she said after a while, her voice measured but quieter than before. I let out a small breath, glancing around the room again, the impossible blend of wealth, control, and vulnerability all housed in one hidden space. "I think I ran out of surprises the moment that wall opened," I admitted. "After that, everything just feels like it belongs to a different version of reality." A faint smile touched her lips, but it didn't last long. "It does," she said. "Two different realities. That's the problem." I understood what she meant more than she probably expected. It wasn't about wealth or status. It was about living in two versions of yourself, one for the world and one you kept hidden just to survive it. "I get it," I said. She looked at me then, more curious than skeptical. "Do you?" I nodded slowly. "Not like you, not with companies or boardrooms or all of this." I gestured lightly around the space. "But I know what it's like to carry something no one else sees." Her expression shifted slightly, something softer replacing the guarded edge. "Tell me." I hesitated for a moment, not because I didn't want to answer, but because I wasn't used to being asked. People didn't usually stop to hear stories like mine, but something about this moment made it feel different. I wasn't always doing night shifts. I had plans, a steady job, a life that looked like it was going somewhere. I paused, the memories rising whether I invited them or not. Then everything changed. My son's mother left, just gone. No warning, no explanation that made sense. I swallowed, pushing through the familiar tightness in my chest. And suddenly, it was just me and him. Every decision, every bill, every late night, it all landed on me at once. There wasn't time to fall apart. I had to keep going, no matter what. She listened without interrupting, her attention unwavering. People see me as just a guy working long hours. They don't see the part where I go home and try to be everything for someone else, where I'm constantly wondering if I'm doing enough, or if one mistake could bring everything down. The words hung in the air heavier than I expected them to feel once spoken aloud. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then she stepped away from the wall and moved closer, her movements slower now, not out of weakness, but intention. You build stability, every day, for someone who depends on you completely. I let out a small, almost humorless laugh. That's one way to put it. It's the right way, she replied. There was no arrogance in her tone, no distance, just recognition. And you, I asked after a moment, you carry an entire company, thousands of people, expectations that never stop. Her gaze shifted slightly, not away from me, but inward. I carry an image, one that has to remain flawless, decisive, strong. She paused, because if I crack, even a little, everything connected to me feels it. Sounds familiar, I said softly. Our eyes met again, and this time there was no barrier between us, no invisible line separating our worlds, just understanding. It's strange, she admitted after a moment. I've spent years surrounded by people, teams, executives, investors, and yet, she headed herself slightly, none of them know this version of me. Maybe they're not supposed to. Maybe, she echoed, but it gets isolating. I nodded. Yeah, it does. There it was, the truth neither of us had said out loud until now. Different lives, different scales, same kind of loneliness. She leaned lightly against the console across from me, mirroring my posture without realizing it. The shift was subtle, but it meant something. The distance between us, physical, emotional, social, it had all narrowed without either of us forcing it. Tonight, she said slowly, you stepped into something that wasn't yours. You could have walked away. I thought about it, I admitted. What changed your mind? I didn't hesitate this time. My son. I don't want him growing up thinking people only look out for themselves. She held my gaze, something deeper settling in her expression. He's lucky, she said. I shook my head slightly. No, I'm the lucky one. A quiet pause followed, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was steady, grounded. For the first time that night, it didn't feel like we were standing on opposite sides of anything. Not wealth, not power, not circumstance. Just two people, shaped by loss, holding everything together the only way we knew how. And somehow, in the middle of a hidden warehouse no one else knew existed, those two worlds had found a way to meet.
The air in the warehouse had settled into something steady, almost grounding, as if the storm of everything unsaid had finally passed through and left clarity behind. The glow of the screens hummed softly in the background, but neither of us paid them much attention anymore. For the first time since I stepped into this hidden world, it didn't feel overwhelming. It felt real. Not because of the technology or the scale of it, but because of what had been revealed within it. She stood a few steps away from me now, her posture no longer guarded in the same rigid way as before, but not entirely relaxed either. It was the kind of stance someone holds when they've made a decision they know will matter. "You understand what this place is," she said quietly, her eyes meeting mine with a seriousness that hadn't been there before. I nodded once. Yeah. And what it means if the wrong people find out about it. There was no need to elaborate. I'd already seen enough to know this wasn't just a private office. It was a vulnerability. a space where power was set aside and something far more human was exposed. "I'm not going to tell anyone," I said simply. She studied my face for a moment, as if weighing the truth of that statement, measuring something beyond just the words. Then she nodded slightly, as though confirming a conclusion she had already reached before asking the question. "I believe you," she said. The simplicity of it caught me off guard. Most people didn't trust that easily, especially not someone in her position. But maybe this wasn't about trust built over time. Maybe it was about recognizing something in each other that didn't need explanation. She reached into the inside pocket of her coat and pulled out a small, unmarked card. It looked ordinary at first glance, matte black, no logo, no visible text. But when she held it out toward me, I could feel the weight behind it. Not physical weight. Something else. "Take this," she said. I hesitated before accepting it, turning it over between my fingers. "There's nothing on it." "There doesn't need to be. It's registered to you now." I looked up at her, confusion flickering across my face. "If you ever find yourself in a situation where you need help, real help, you use that," she explained. "It will connect you to resources most people don't even know exist." I let out a quiet breath, not quite sure how to respond. That sounds like more than I deserve for stepping into an alley. Her expression softened slightly, but there was something firm beneath it. "It's not a reward," she said. "It's balance." Balance? You intervened in a moment where you had nothing to gain and everything to lose. People like that are rare. She paused, her gaze steady. I don't forget rare things. I glanced back down at the card, the reality of what she was offering slowly settling in. This wasn't just about gratitude. It was about connection, a thread between two lives that should have never crossed paths. "I don't know if I'll ever use it," I admitted. "That's not the point," she said. "The point is, you won't have to face everything alone anymore." Those words lingered longer than anything else she had said, because that was the part that hit hardest. Not the access, not the power, the idea of not being alone. I slipped the card into my pocket carefully, like it was something fragile, even if it didn't look it. "All right," I said quietly, "then I'll hold on to it." She nodded once, satisfied. A moment passed between us, quiet but full. "So what happens now?" I asked. Her gaze shifted briefly toward the wall of unfinished projects, then back to me. "Now," she said, "we go back to our lives." "Like this never happened?" A faint, almost knowing smile crossed her face. "Not exactly," she replied, "but the world doesn't need to know about it." I understood what she meant. This wasn't something that fit into ordinary life. It wasn't a story you told casually. It was something that existed separately. "And you?" I asked. "You'll keep coming back here?" "Yes," she said without hesitation, "until I figure out how to finish what he started." I nodded slowly. "You will." She looked at me then, as if surprised by the certainty in my voice. "You don't know me," she said. I shrugged slightly, ignoring the pull in my ribs. "I know enough." For a second, it seemed like she might say something more, but instead she just gave a small nod, accepting it. We walked back toward the hidden entrance together, the polished floor giving way to the steel threshold that separated her two worlds. As we approached, the door began to slide open automatically, revealing the cold, dim reality of the outside night waiting just beyond. I stopped just before stepping out. "Hey," I said. She turned. "Thank you," I added. "Not for the card, for trusting me." Something in her expression shifted again, subtle but real. "Thank you," she replied, "for not walking away." And with that, the moment settled into something unspoken but understood. Not a transaction, not an obligation, something quieter, stronger. An agreement without signatures, a connection without witnesses. As I stepped back into the night, the cold air hit me again, sharp and familiar, but it didn't feel quite the same anymore. Because somewhere behind me, hidden within steel and silence, there was now a place and a person who knew my story. And somehow, that changed everything. By the time I stepped out of the industrial district and back into the quiet rhythm of the city, the night had already begun to fade into something softer. The streets were still mostly empty, but the stillness no longer felt as heavy as it had before. Maybe it was the adrenaline finally wearing off, or maybe it was something else entirely, something harder to name. My ribs still ached with every step, a dull reminder of the fight I hadn't planned, but even that felt distant compared to everything that had unfolded afterward. I kept walking, hands tucked into my jacket, my mind replaying moments from the warehouse in fragments, the hidden door, the glow of those screens, the wall filled with unfinished dreams, and her voice when she spoke about him. It all felt surreal, like something that didn't quite belong to my life. And yet, there it was, sitting quietly in my pocket in the form of a simple black card. When I finally reached home, the familiar creak of the door greeted me. The apartment was dim, lit only by the faint glow of a lamp I must have left on earlier. And there he was, my son, curled up on the couch exactly the way I had imagined, his small hand still wrapped around that worn-out truck. For a moment, I just stood there, watching him, letting the reality of this world settle back in. This was my life. Simple, fragile in its own way, but real. I moved quietly, careful not to wake him, and gently draped a blanket over his shoulders. He stirred slightly, mumbling something incoherent before settling again. I smiled faintly, the tension in my chest easing just a little. Whatever had happened tonight, whatever strange path I'd stepped onto, it hadn't changed this, and that mattered more than anything. The next morning came too quickly. It always did. The routine picked up like it never missed a beat. Breakfast to make, lunches to pack, small conversations with sleepy eyes and half-finished sentences. My son didn't notice the bruises right away, and I didn't offer explanations he didn't need. Life didn't pause for reflection. It kept moving, pulling me along with it. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. I felt it in the way I carried myself, in the way my thoughts lingered a little longer on things that used to pass by unnoticed. There was a quiet awareness now, a sense that the world was bigger than the version I saw every day, and that somehow I had been allowed to glimpse a part of it few ever did. Days passed, and the night of the alley began to settle into memory, but it never faded completely. Every so often, I'd find my hand brushing against my pocket, feeling for the card just to remind myself it was real. I hadn't used it. I wasn't sure I ever would, but it was there, not as a shortcut or an escape, but as something steadier, a reminder that somewhere out there I wasn't as alone in this as I once thought. And then there was her. I didn't see her again. Not at first. There were no sudden messages, no dramatic reappearances, just silence. But it wasn't the kind of silence that meant absence. It felt intentional, like a boundary we both understood without needing to define it. She had her world, meetings, decisions, responsibilities that stretched far beyond anything I could fully grasp. And I had mine. School drop-offs, long shifts, quiet nights filled with small victories that no one else ever saw. 2 lives, still separate, still different, but no longer disconnected. Every now and then, I'd catch myself wondering if she was back in that warehouse, standing in front of that wall, tracing the lines of something unfinished, trying to figure out how to carry it forward. And strangely enough, I believed she would. Not because of her power or her resources, but because of what I had seen in her when the mask slipped. The part that didn't give up. The part that kept building, even when everything told her to stop. Weeks later, as I walked home from another late shift, the city didn't feel quite as cold. The shadows were still there, the silence still lingered, but it didn't carry the same weight it once did. I passed the alley without stopping, barely glancing toward it, yet aware of what had begun there. A single moment, a single decision. That was all it had taken. When I reached my building, I paused for just a second, looking up at the dim lights in the windows above. Somewhere inside, my son was waiting. That was my foundation, my reason, the thing I would keep building, no matter what. But now I understood something I hadn't before. Foundations don't always stand alone. Sometimes they're connected in ways you can't see, quietly, invisibly, but undeniably strong. I reached into my pocket one more time, my fingers brushing against the smooth surface of the card. I didn't take it out.
I wasn't sure I ever would. But it was there, not as a shortcut or an escape, but as something steadier. A reminder that somewhere out there, I wasn't as alone in this as I once thought. And then, I realized something that settled deep and steady within me. The strongest foundations aren't built in the light, where everyone can see them. They're built in the shadows, through moments no one else understands, through choices no one else witnesses. And sometimes, those hidden foundations are the ones that hold everything together.
If this story moved you, like, subscribe, and join Drew Daily Stories for more powerful tales every day. Don't miss out, hit the bell, and share your thoughts below with us.